Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Eric Frandsen and Jason Walker, and a special edition podcast from the Full Court Press. We've had these shortened shows here because of March Madness going on, but we wanted to make sure we still gave time to dive into the matchups between Utah State and TCU. Facing each other in the NCAA Tournament Friday night. We'll likely have parts of it here on the Fan, but the full unadulterated, uninterrupted game will also be on our sister station, KVNU, on Friday night with the pregame KVNU game day starting at 6:30. Tip-off expected to be around 7:55 for that game. But, Jason, let's get into the matchups here in the road that got both of these teams to this point. Utah State is an 8 seed, TCU as a 9 seed. TCU, kind of a middle-of-the-road team in the Big 12. Utah State, the top team in the Mountain West when you look at regular season standings. But there's some interesting things that these two teams have a lot of similarities in how they're built and how they play. Neither team particularly shoots the ball great from beyond the arc. Both teams do a good job of sharing the ball and helping each other out. So there's a lot of mirrors of themselves with what will happen on Friday night.
Yeah, and there's some similarities with TCU and some of the teams the Aggies have played in conference play. There's some similarities to San Diego State. There's some similarities to some of the teams that can play some small ball, and that there's some versatile wings that TCU has. I think this will be one of the more athletic teams that Utah State has faced all year. So there's a lot of challenges that TCU presents in their style, in their talent, in their athleticism. And it's going to be a tough team for Utah State to beat. I know the team finished 8th in the Big 12 standings or thereabouts, but Big 12 is a very good conference, and TCU is a good team. When you look at their schedule, they have some wins over some really good teams. Granted, they have some losses to some teams that aren't as good, but TCU can go toe-to-toe with literally anybody in the entire Division I, because they beat Houston.
Yeah, they beat Houston. Very, very good team. Houston is. They beat them in the regular season by 1, and then lost to them in the conference tournament. Lost by 15 in that game. You look at their Q1 resume. The best teams that they've played, with one exception, are exclusively in conference. And really, you look at Utah State. It's pretty much the same thing, except Utah State did play Bradley. That was a quad 1 game that they lost. That was in the early in the year. The one exception to TCU is a quad 1 loss also, and that was to Nevada. So there is one common opponent between these two teams, and the outcome was pretty similar in both games.
Yeah, the Aggies probably getting a worse showing. I know TCU lost fairly bad to Nevada. It was like 88-75 or something to that effect.
Yeah, 88-75.
The Aggies lost, at home by like 14 points, whereas that
77-63.
Whereas that one was a neutral site game. So both teams struggling against Nevada. I don't know if it's a matchup thing, and I don't know how much. I didn't even really go back and watch that game. I don't really know how much I can really glean from that. I was watching some other TCU games. But one of the interesting things that I was looking into, and I don't know if this really means a whole lot because it's the similarity between Utah State and TCU, and that is a lack of, a lot of really good quality away from home wins. Although both teams have one major exception to that. Because you look at TCU, they're I think 2-8 against teams. So they're 2-8. So in games away from home, and against teams that are, where did I put the cutoff? I think top 40 in the net. So they're 2-8 against teams that are top 40 in the net when they play them away from home. Or is that only, that actually might be 1-8. Because I think
so I only see their one win away from home against those criteria. Baylor.
Yeah, it's Baylor. That's
triple overtime.
Yeah, that's the one major exception, and that was Baylor, who was on a 2-game losing streak going into that game. So TCU may have caught Baylor at just the right time. The other one that's close. That's why I was trying to figure out exactly where the cutoff is, because Oklahoma is their other quality-ish away from home victory. That was their first game. I don't know if it was round 1, but it was their first game in the Big 12 tournament. Oklahoma's like 40-something in the net. So depending on where, okay, here it is. It's top 70 in the net, I think, for TCU. They're 2-8 against teams in the top 70 of the net when they play that team away from home. So neutral site or just pure away game. The Aggies don't fare a whole lot better because they're 2-5 when you draw it along similar lines. They have the win over Boise State, quality win. And then the win over San Francisco, which is debatable whether you even call that a neutral site game because it's played at the Delta Center.
It's still 80 miles away from home, so it's still a neutral site.
Yeah. So you're like 800
It's more of a neutral site than it was when the Aggies went to San Francisco.
Only slightly.
Played in the Chase Center.
There are a lot of Aggie fans that are like only 20 minutes away from the Delta Center.
Yeah, that's true.
So you talk about how many of those people travel to Logan to go to football games. A lot of them went there for that Delta Center game. So, yeah, both teams have struggled against good teams away from home, which is fairly typical of anybody that isn't like a top-tier team. But, it's just kind of it's like which team is going to show up more in these neutral site games?
Yeah, because the TCU's best win was that home game against Houston, which was a down-to-the-wire 68-67 win. Utah State's best win on their resume is a home game win against San Diego State.
Yeah.
Which was a 5-point game.
Yeah, both of these teams played well at home. Like, they beat teams at home. They beat good teams at home. TCU beat one of the best teams at home.
And give them credit for that.
Yeah, and hung with other really good teams. They hung with Kansas. They lost by like 1 point. They beat Baylor in triple overtime. I think there was one other really good. I think they lost a really close one to Iowa State. That was at home where they lost by like 1 or 2 points. That's why I said this team can go toe-to-toe with anyone. They've struggled to pick up more than a couple of quality wins. They were 9-9 in conference play. They were like 21-11 overall. So struggling a little bit, but they've beaten and played with some of the best teams this country has to offer at the Division I level.
Yeah, and the Big 12 offers really good competition for TCU that they had to face. Mountain West offered good competition for USU as well, but looking at what did each team do out of conference, TCU's best out-of-conference win is a quad 3 win on a neutral site against Arizona State, who's really not very good.
Yeah, they didn't play anybody. There
really isn't anybody on their resume.
They played like 2 teams. They were like in the top 100, 2 or 3 teams in the top 100 of the net or something like that. I was looking mostly at KenPom rankings, so I don't know exactly what their net was, but it was full of triple digits, their entire non-conference schedule. Teams like Nevada and Clemson, those were the best teams they played in non-conference.
Yeah.
Lost to both of them.
Yep. Yeah, and Utah State, by comparison, the Aggies' best non-conference win was that San Francisco game, which you mentioned, which was 66 in the net. Utah State also beat Santa Clara, which is 105, so just barely out of the top 100. But, there's a lot of things that are pretty similar about both teams, just looking at the team resume overall. But then when you start to look at how do the teams play themselves, there's some similarities also. Both teams kind of struggle from outside. Utah State is one of the best in the country in three-point percentage defense, but TCU is not going to take a lot of threes.
Yeah, they don't take a whole lot of threes, though they do make them at a pretty solid clip. They're top 100 in the country in three-point percentage, but they take fewer threes than Utah State does.
Yes.
So, funnily enough, though, I wouldn't have thought that based on the game. I was watching the Kansas game, and they felt like they were jacking up as many threes as they wanted. Like, maybe it's because Kansas was tough and it was a road game, but I was watching the game and I was trying to reconcile with, okay, the stats say they don't take a whole lot of threes, but this game they certainly feel comfortable attempting three-pointers. Maybe that's just the way the game is, that it's still 23 pointers a game. It's still like a third of your shot attempts. But
yes. They are ranked 304th in the country out of 351 teams in three-point attempts per game.
Oh, it's gone up since I looked at it. I had them at 313th a day ago.
Three-pointers per game, they're ranked 252nd. So they don't shoot a lot of threes. So this is going to be a game where there's going to be a lot of action at the rim. And they do shoot. I mean, they do commit a lot of fouls. They're ranked like 250th or 240th, whatever, in fouls per game. So this is a team that fouls quite a bit, but it's also meaning that they're a team that plays at the rim quite a bit.
So I want to touch on the fouls because this is one of the things that worries me a little bit about this game. And that's that, Great Osborne, a big part of his game is forcing players in uncomfortable situations, underneath the basket, and then basically forcing them to foul. And ones, and then, shots that he misses that are tough contested ones, you draw a foul on him. It's been pretty well noted that the NCAA tournament does not have nearly as many fouls called. The referees swallow their whistle; they're barely there.
Right.
And my goodness,
can't rely on that as part of your game.
Yeah, when I was watching Colorado State against Virginia, I was amazed by how little was called. Now, mind you, I love it when games don't have as many fouls called. I love seeing teams play physical and referees letting them play physical. But there were twice in that game where I think it was Joel Scott, the Colorado State-Virginia game. I don't know if I mentioned that, but Joel Scott got the ball underneath the basket, pump faked a guy, the man behind him, because he'd beaten his guy, and so he pump faked it to maybe try and draw a foul. The defender put his knee not like in a dirty, he jumped up and ended up his knee ended up on Joel Scott's upper shoulder blade, to the point where the Mountain West refs might have considered ejecting the Virginia player from the game for such a bold, half landing on Joel Scott. Definite contact, like I said, his knee is on his shoulder blade. That is a foul 10 days, of the week in the Mountain West. And they didn't call it on 2 different occasions. And mind you, I kind of like that. But I don't know if it's good for Utah State because Osibor, he's not exclusively fueled by drawing fouls, like James Harden and Joel Embiid sometimes feel like they are.
Right.
But it can be a big part of his impact. And if he's not having a great shooting game, if he's doing well shooting-wise, he can go out there and he can score 25 points and only take 4 to 5 free throws. But if he's having a bad game and he's getting frustrated at the rim and he's not getting foul calls, he could end up getting taken out of the game by, there not being foul calls when there's physical contact. Because he'll have been used to getting foul calls every time that contact happens, and then when it's not happening, well, what's he going to do? Now, Osibor is good enough to get around that. But will he? That's one of the biggest things I want to see is how is he going to handle a game where he's not likely to shoot more than 7 or 8 free throws? And he's not going to get those, when he's in the post and he's fighting with the players in the post. He's not going to get those cheap foul calls that referees love to call those away from the ball. Oh, you fouled him because he pulled on his jersey a little bit.
Yeah.
That's half the fouls he draws. He's not going to get those. At least very often. How is he going to handle that fact?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've seen a few games for Utah State where Osibor doesn't live at the line, and his impact on the game, at least offensively, seems a bit diminished. And those are games where other players have to up their game. Obviously, this is a game where everybody's got to play at their A game. This is a game where the Aggies have not been able to win a game in this tournament for over 20 years. I don't think any player on this roster was alive the last time Utah State won a game. Well, maybe not true.
Darius.
Darius may have been just a wee toddler. Mason Falslev may have been
I don't even think he was, because I think he's only about 22, 23.
Yeah, so it's been a long time. So this is everybody's got to step up and play their A game for this one. But in looking at the matchups, though, you look at who potentially could have a larger role based on matchups. Because as we've seen, seeding can be one thing, but matchups are a wholly different aspect when you look at comparing teams and who might win the game. Because for TCU, their top player is also a forward, and that's Emmanuel Miller, who's averaging about 16 points a game. he takes a lot of free throw attempts as well. About 6'7". So there's going to be an interesting matchup between Miller and Osibor in how they play in the low post.
Yeah, it will be interesting because with Miller, the thing is he's more of a wing, and that kind of makes it tricky because you're not sure if Osibor will guard him or if it'll be Ian Martinez. If the Aggies go small, how does that work? There's kind of an interesting thing, and I was diving into this, and I'll have an analysis on TCU coming out later today, where I spent way too much time than I probably should have on just Great Osibor against TCU. How will TCU guard him? I watched film almost exclusively trying to figure out, or at least one of the big things I was looking for was, okay, how does TCU guard players like Osibor, these post-up dominant players, guys who most of their offense is in the post-up? There were a couple guys that were similar to Osibor, not similar enough to draw a true comparison, because I came up with Hunter Dickinson at Kansas, who's a 7'1" center who also shoots, and then some guy from Houston Christian, who was like the fourth leading scorer on their team. So I didn't get tons of great comparisons. But the thing I was looking for is, will TCU try and single cover Great Osibor? Will they be like San Diego State, who just kind of throw their best defender who has a somewhat physical matchup with Osibor and just let them go to work? Or like Fresno State, when they threw out one of their centers, they just kind of say, all right, you're big, you should be able to handle Great Osibor as best you can. We're not going to just throw double teams at him, at least for the large part. And in those situations, Great Osibor cooks. He does great. He's fast enough to get around pretty much any big man. He has a spin move that's just really hard to stop. And so he's able to get shots, draw fouls. And even if he's not drawing fouls, he gets good shots and is able to score points, free throws or not. And so you want to know, is TCU going to do that? The answer is probably, to some degree, if they're trying to guard Osibor with the center. Because you mentioned, Miller may be the guy alongside him. Like, the other wrinkle to this is that if Utah State is playing Isaac Johnson, I know I'm getting really deep into the weeds here, but there's this whole chess match of who on TCU is guarding Great Osibor.
Yeah.
Is it a guy like Miller? There's also Coles. That's his last. I can't remember.
Jacoby Coles.
Yeah, Jacoby Coles, because he's a bit more of a physical matchup, because Miller's he's like 10 or 15 pounds lighter than Coles is. And Coles does come off the bench, though. Or he has come off the bench. He started some games. They've got like three guys that they've kind of mixed in and out of the starting lineup all year, and Coles is one of them, where he started 11 games but come off the bench in a lot of others. He may end up matched against Osibor. But the thing is, they also they have a bunch of centers. They have probably like 2 or 3 different centers they could throw at Osibor. But this is why I bring up Isaac Johnson, because if he's out there, do they still put their center against Great Osibor and then leave like a 6'7" Miller or a 6'7" Coles on a 7-footer like Johnson or Sacco?
And because they also got a 6'11", what's his name, Ernest Udell Jr.?
Yeah, Uday. He's our starter typically. I think he's missed a few games, and TCU doesn't go small a ton. They do it sometimes. Like their 7th most used lineup is a 5-out lineup, but they're usually going to have a center out there.
They've got some size.
Yeah, they've got like 3 guys that they'll play. Granted, they have like 10 guys they actually play as a team. They have like 10 guys that average at least 9 minutes a game. But Uday, a guy named Cook, and a guy whose name I can't pronounce, whose last name begins with an M. I don't know if you want to try it.
Micah P. Oh, the last name starts with
an M.
his
last name starts with an M.
Oh.
He's like a 6'9".
Isam Mosiafa?
Yeah, that's him. So those are the 3 guys they were throwing at players like Dickinson. And they may be the ones they throw at Osibor. Now, I think Osibor can probably beat any one of those guys about as much as he will beat anybody else. But if they're sticking these big, beefy centers on Osibor and Isaac Johnson's going up against a 6'7" forward, they best be throwing it into the post for Johnson as well. Like pick and rolls, loft it up to him and let him shoot layups. Khalifa Sacco as well. And so I'm really interested in this potential chess match in the post where who guards Great Osibor? Like, do they put one of the big guys on him? Do they go small to try and counter the Aggies? Can Great Osobor beat a small ball lineup where maybe they end up throwing double teams? If they don't throw double teams, does he just go for 30 points? And maybe TCU just tries to live with that and stop everybody else. Like, to me, that's the most interesting little part of the game, because TCU can approach defending Great Osobor in 2 or 3 different ways, and they have the personnel for each of them. But what are they going to try and do? Especially because if they try and go small ball, I think that may be their best weapon against the Aggies. But TCU doesn't go small ball very often, so I don't know if that's what they plan on doing.
Yeah, with their size and their depth at that position, they're one of the best teams in the country in offensive rebounds. Ranked 33rd in the country in offensive rebounds per game compared to Utah State, who's ranked 226th in offensive rebounds a game.
Yeah, and to me, it's like you're never really concerned if your team isn't a very good offensive rebounding team, because you don't have to be.
If you shoot the ball well, then you're not going to always be a great offensive rebounding.
And even then, like, if you don't emphasize offensive rebounding, you tend to be a good transition defense team.
Yes.
Which is a very important thing in today's game with fast-paced teams and how often teams try and push the ball. You want to get your defense back and set. But it does concern me, when you have a team that does go for offensive rebounds, and if they're good at it, they will punish you badly. And we've seen the Aggies in games struggle to grab defensive boards. San Diego State kept doing it to them, a team that's athletic. And I think, as far as an athletic profile, that's one of the better comparisons. San Diego State has a lot of athletic guys. TCU is going to do the same thing. They're going to have guys that it's not like they're just throwing everyone at the rim, but they'll have guys go at the rim and they'll grab offensive rebounds. When they shoot 3-pointers, they've got guys who can out-jump you if the rebound flies out to like the elbow or the free throw line extended. They'll have guys that'll grab those boards and get extra possessions. And that's probably the thing that kind of scares you the most about this TCU team, is the fact they're athletic and they can hit some tough shots. And if they miss those shots, they'll go up and get the board against the Aggies, even if they work hard and play good defense, which I think the Aggies will. They can play good defense, and then you end up giving 2 or 3 chances on one possession, they get the points.
Something you brought up a few minutes ago was just how many guys play for TCU. They've got a deep bench. At least they use a lot of guys, and they've got a lot of size and athleticism that go along with that. There's a familiar name on there, Jameer Nelson. Some people, Jameer Nelson Jr. It's not Jameer Nelson himself; it's his son. But they've got some other players that. It's a lot of experience on this team. Guys who play, they're juniors and seniors, a lot of seniors on this team and a lot of depth. In fact, they are one of the best teams in the country with bench points, and they are ranked, 30th in the country in getting production off the bench, whereas Utah State, 205th. That's a big issue. Granted, if it's a tight rotation for Danny Sprinkle, and if the starters are playing well, then you don't necessarily need a lot of production off the bench that we've seen. But against this team, you're probably going to need some more Carson Templin and Khalifa Sacco to play a significant role. Maybe not necessarily points, but they have to have an impact on the game in some way.
Yeah, they do. The thing is, though, is that the depth isn't as worrying for kind of a one-off. Because, as you said, if your starters are playing well, then it doesn't really matter. Because you'll be getting production, and if it's your top 7 guys playing the entire game, like we're probably going to see no more than 8 players, maybe only just 7 in this game, and it may depend on how Mason Falslev is feeling. Because the Aggies can play a 7-man rotation and be fine. They're going to be well enough rested for it. They'll have had basically a week off, so they'll be rested. You can play 7 guys 40 minutes and do fine. But, when a team's best players go off the court and you can still get good production when they're not, if you can borderline win or at least not really badly lose the minutes when your stars are off the court, that's incredibly valuable. Like San Diego State, Jaden Ledee was off the court for the last 4 minutes of the first half of the game the Aggies lost in the tournament. They won those minutes. That's incredibly valuable. Then you put him back out there, and you can keep being aggressive, and you can build on the momentum that your bench guys did. So when Miller goes to the bench, because he leads the team in minutes, and he averages 32. That would be third on the Aggies.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So when he goes to the bench for 7-8 minutes, potentially, maybe he plays 40 minutes because the NCAA tournament and a lot of stars just play the whole game. But like, say those guys go to the bench, Jameer Nelson and any one of their guys, any one of their leading scorers, they're going to be bringing on guys who can average 6, 7, 8 themselves. And that's not going to lead the team. Those guys aren't likely to lead the team in scoring, but it's enough. It's like when we talk about Javon Jackson having 6, 7, 8 points in a game, how huge that is. TCU's got like 4 of those guys who can have that kind of performance, and the Aggies might have like 2 or 3. They can provide that kind of production off the bench.
Yeah, this is a team that likes to play aggressive. They're one of the top teams in the country in creating turnovers and getting steals. They are the number 1 team in the country in fast break points. So you talked about giving up offensive rebound attempts to get back on transition D. That's something that will be a big piece of this on Friday night for USU. But for Utah State to have the edge here, I know you've talked at length about Great Osobor and his role and ability to get to the free throw line. But is there another player that, when you look at the rosters and the matchups, that needs to have a stellar game for USU to get the win?
You're looking at Darius Brown and Ian Martinez. One of those two, probably both. Maybe you can say Mason Falslev. Like, you need to have multiple guys playing great games, and most of the others to be playing at least good games, especially offensive. Like Darius Brown, he's had a couple of quiet games shooting-wise. He needs to get back into kind of what he was doing late in the season, hitting big shots, shooting good percentages. Ian Martinez, he's kind of upped his game a little bit, shooting a little bit better the last few games, so keep that up. And then Mason, assuming he's healthy, be aggressive, get those 9, 10, 11 points. But yeah, I'm looking straight at Darius Brown and Ian Martinez. Like, everyone talks about how much you need guard play in March. All right, guards.
Time to shine.
You've got some tough matchups, across from you, but you also need to be hitting 3-pointers. This is where the Aggies can really use some good 3-point shooting games. Have a game where you make 8 or 9 threes. Like, that'd probably win you the game. The Aggies say 8 or 9 3-pointers. I'd be shocked if they didn't win.
Yeah, because then you're spacing the floor. You're creating opportunity for more room for Great Osobor, and you're just keeping TCU at bay. Yeah. So you can do that.
And TCU's not as likely to hit those 8 or 9 threes. So if you can be hitting those backbreakers over and over and getting good shots inside, that'll win you the game. And so that's where Darius Brown and Ian Martinez really need to have a great impact, is hitting those big shots and then obviously finding ways to make sure Great Osobor does great work inside. And that's the key offensively. Defensively, there's a whole host of issues you got to deal with. Defensive rebounding, guarding versatile wings who are going to be driving to the basket, and they're going to do so really effectively. Can you stay in front of him? Can a 6'3" Ian Martinez guard a 6'7" wing, over and over? I think he can, but he's going to have to actually do it.
Right.
Easier said than done. So plenty of work to do. Ultimately, I picked TCU to win this game, but that's not because I think TCU is an overwhelmingly impossible matchup. I think it's just a very good team the Aggies may just struggle to beat unless they play a game akin to like when they played at Boise State, home against San Diego State, home against New Mexico. If it has those kind of solid defensive performances, but more importantly, like great offensive performances, that'll win them the game. But those games have been fairly rare for them this season.
Yeah, but we have seen them respond well after rough losses. Only once this year have they lost in back-to-back games. They've usually come out of those losses looking very, very good. So pregame on our sister station, KVNU, will begin. KVNU game day will begin at 6:30, and tip-off will be at 7:55. So an extended pregame coverage with Al Lewis and Jalen Moore, and then they'll have the full play-by-play coverage there. We'll have play-by-play of all the games from March Madness here on 106.9 The Fan FM and 1390 AM. That's going to do it for us for our special edition podcast, the preview of Utah State and TCU.
Special preview of what is the college formerly known as Texas Christian University.
There you go.
Because now they're just TCU.
Now they're just TCU.
Kind of weird. Kind of weird they did that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening in and to catch other podcasts as we talk about what's going on throughout the rest of the Mountain West.